Welcome back to the Brahmin Word, and we are going to be over the next couple weeks of Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're going to be breaking down a book that I think is, yes, about love, don't get me wrong, but I think it's also about how to experience joy in the Christian life. And that book is the book of Ruth. It is a wonderful love story, don't get me wrong, about Ruth and Boaz, or about Ruth and the love that she has for her mother in law, Naomi. Definitely it's about that. But I think it's also about joy in the Christian life. How do we experience that? How do we go about doing that, especially in situations that you wouldn't necessarily find yourself experiencing joy in? And so, with that, I want to break down the book of Ruth and also break down what it means to have joy in the Christian life. So, turn with me to Ruth chapter 1. Ruth chapter 1. So, we're going to be looking at chapter 1 today. So, Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his two sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and stayed there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her two sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years. And both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman, basically Naomi, was left without her two sons and her husband. So, we start this book with a very depressing situation. Um, but it's interesting to see what timetable this is. Verse 1, this is in the days of when the judges ruled. And one of those, do we know for certain which judge was ruling at the time? Maybe. But for me, though, it's just during the time of judges. So this is before kings became a thing in Israel. And the and again, during the time of Judges, Israel is going through the cycle of sinning, and then the Lord sending an opposition or an adversary, a different country, to discipline them. And then they eventually call out to the Lord to save them. He sends them a judge. The judge delivers the country of Israel. And then some time passes, the judge passes away, and then the Israelites go back to sinning against the Lord. So we're in this cycle of that, and you have this husband and wife with their two sons. They are Israelites, and the man is from Bethlehem, which I think is interesting to point towards Jesus, right? But they sojourn to the country of Moab. Well, Moab is one of the big countries that attacks the country of Israel during the time of Judges. One of the big ones was Gideon, which we actually went through in a former Brahmin word, which you can check out later. But yeah, the Moabites were one of the countries that attacked Israel. So you would think of all the countries that they would go to, Moab would not be one. But the reason why they go, though, is because that there is a famine in the country of Israel. So that makes this family go to Moab. And when they get there, they the husband dies. Elimelech passes away, and Naomi is now a widow, but she does have sons. So a widow in the ancient Near East was a very precarious situation. Now, if you had children, if you had sons, you had a better chance to get through your widowhood. But widows in the ancient Near East was it was a very tough situation to be in. Not that it isn't today, right? It's still tough today, but what I'm saying in this day and age, it's a very dangerous situation to be in, especially if you're not in your native country. It can be even more dangerous. But she does have two sons, and those two sons take wives. But it's interesting knowing that the Israelite law in the books of Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy tried to teach the Israelites to only marry other Israelites, so they don't get tempted by pagan gods. These sons of Naomi and Elimelech do the exact opposite, and they take Moabite wives. Now, obviously, one of them Ruth, turns out to be very important and a very great example to this book, but they are going against the word of God, and so within 10 years now both of the sons have died, and so now instead of just one widow you have three widows, and so now they're all in kind of this precarious situation, and so Naomi finally comes to a plan, and that is in verse 6 and following. Then she arose with her daughters in law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So basically, the famine's kind of is basically over. So she set out from the place where she was with her two daughters in law, and they went on the way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her two daughters in law, Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you, in the home of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they now before we get to their response, what is she asking or kind of demanding? But what is she kind of getting at here in verse 8? Basically, she understands the dangers of widowhood, but she also understands, which we'll get into in a little bit in the response here. But she understands that she can't provide for them. She has no sons. They didn't have children with her sons, and so there's nothing for them to really be looking forward to. There's no escape from their widowhood unless they went back to their own city and their own country in Moab, and they would be able to find somebody to get married to. And so that is kind of the predicament that she sees. And so yes, she could you say that she's doubting the Lord? Maybe, but I think she's just seeing with common sense the situation that they're in. But now let's see the response from these two ladies. Verse 10. And they said to her, No, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this evening and should bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother in law, but Ruth clung to her. So you have one that goes, Orpah, and then one that's staying at the moment, and that's Ruth. We'll get into her response in a second in verse 15. But you see the despair that is on Naomi's mind at this point. And you would think to yourself, okay, Naomi should have in her mind the fact that Lord works miracles when it comes to Sarah giving birth to Isaac at 90 years old, when it comes to barren women getting pregnant, with you have Rachel, um, you have just so many different examples, and so you would think that this would make sense. However, in my minds, again, she's looking out for her daughters-in-law. She is, and she's looking out for her daughters-in-law, But yet she makes an interesting comment here at the end of verse 13. Look at the end of verse 13. No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. It's interesting. Is Naomi blaming the Lord here? Maybe, but I think she really quite understands the what has happened, that they left the country of the promised land going into a foreign country, especially one that attacked them possibly beforehand, the country of Moab, or would eventually attack them during the time of the judges, and 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 uh and she wants to go to that place. And not only that, but she allows her sons to marry non-Israelite women. There's so many different things that are against the Lord's law. And I think she just realizes, look, I've kind of gone against the Lord. And so this is kind of the punishment that, or part of the discipline that he is having me go through. And I think she understands that. And so you have Ruth, though, staying. And at this point, you're thinking to yourself, okay, where in the world is joy in the Christian life? There doesn't seem to be a lot. And that's really interesting. We'll get to that in a second. But let's see Ruth's response here. And Naomi said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. And here's the sad part about verse 15 is the fact that Naomi, not only is she she's okay with Orpah going back to her country, but she's okay with her going back to the pagan gods of Moab. That seems to be a very sad part of Naomi's life here. But so you have that almost despondency in Naomi, but look at what Ruth says in verse 16. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or turn from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. What a great response by Ruth. Not only is it loyalty to Naomi, to her to her mother-in-law, which, knowing that she could possibly never have children, that she could possibly never be remarried, and yet she loves Naomi like she is her mother. And not only that, but she has fallen in love with the Lord, with Yahweh. And that is an incredible picture to see in verse 16, and your God, my God. And even then, but she understands the importance of following after the Lord in verse 17. Um, and so it's a incredible conversion story. And that's where we see joy in the Christian life, is that even at the beginning of our Christian life, we have so many things that when you become a believer that you should turn away from. And those things can be very tempting, and they can seem very important. But when you compare those things to the eternal majesty of the Lord and the eternal glory of our King, there is no comparison. And I think Ruth saw that majesty and saw that no comparison here in verses 16 and 17. And so, because of that, Naomi finally allows her to go with her back to uh, not just the tribe of Judah, but to Bethlehem as well. And that's where we get to verse 19. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was stirred because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? She said to them, do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So, first off, we see the interaction between the Bethlehemites and Ruth, or the Bethlehemites and Naomi. Sorry. We have this woman that has left the promised land, that has gone to a pagan country and allowed her sons to marry pagan women, and brings one of those pagan women back to uh, her native city. And they want to continue to call her Naomi, which is her name, of course, right? But it's the meaning behind it. The name Naomi actually means pleasantness or pleasant. And she wants to be called Mara, which is basically bitter. And but she puts a lot of that on the Lord. So she doesn't want to be called Naomi because she's not pleasant in her situation, and she wants to be called Mara not because she's bitter, but because the Lord has dealt bitterly with her. And so, and so for me, it there's something about lamenting that is healthy, right? There's something about grieving that is healthy, but there's also something about lamenting and grieving that can become extremely unhealthy, and that's bitterness. And that's kind of where Naomi has gotten at. Yes, she believes that the Lord has dealt very bitterly with her in disciplining her, but she has gotten to the point where she's turned bitter against the Lord as well. Just look how she phrases things. Verse 21, I went away full. So my guess is the husband and the sons. And the Lord has brought me back empty, no husband, no sons, even though she has a very dedicated and a just basically just converted to the Lord, daughter-in-law, and but she thinks that she has nothing. Um, so why call me pleasant or Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? Again, she understands the discipline that the Lord brings, but that discipline, the understanding, is now turned into bitterness. And again, you would think that this dedicated daughter in law would bring joy to that. Well, let's see what Ruth is doing. So, verse 22, so Naomi came back, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter in law, with her, who came back from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the start of barley harvest, which again sets up for chapters 2 and 3, where Ruth meets Boaz. And but you have to remember too that this is a very big moment in Ruth's life where she becomes, it could be very dangerous for Ruth to go from to her own country to now a pagan country in her eyes, right? She's going to Israel, which is not her native country, and it could be very dangerous for her. Yes, she does have her mother in law, but it could be very dangerous for her. And again, they're both widows at this point, too, and so that puts them in a very precarious situation. But barley harvest is about to begin, and not only that, but she is about to meet Boaz as well. Which is a big point, not just in the love story of Ruth and Boaz, but it's a big turning point when it comes to the joy of the Christian life, which Naomi finally starts to recognize. Um, so, chapter 1 of Ruth, yes, there's the conversion of Ruth, but there's also the danger of bitterness and despair within this passage as well. But we'll see how meeting Boaz starts to change that aspect. We'll see that on Thursday. However, I'll see you tomorrow with Brahmin Word as well. Thanks.